a silver rib, in this case it's lurex, and the tying thread, which is scarlet. For the back material, which forms the back and the tail, there are two kinds of material that can be used. There's this heavy block, which is this is plasterzote, and you've got to take away a strip, and it's a lot more work involved. Or you can go onto ether foam, which comes into, you bite actually in this strip, and it's very often used for lining fly boxes. It's very quick and easy to prepare. You just want a 5mm strip, which you par away, and that's followed by putting in the tail detail. Right, the hook I'm using today is a Drennan number 8 4X long shank. These hooks are chemical X, they're exceptionally sharp, and I like sharp hooks. If you want to test a hook for sharpness, simply just press it into your skin and tip the hook upside down, and that will prove just how sharp it really is. As always, put the hook into the vise, masking the point so that the silk cannot catch, or thread if you're still using thread. Get a nice level angle. And introduce the silk just behind the eye of the hook, and then continue it in close turns all the way down the shank until the bend is reached. I always say it's a long, laborious journey on these long shanked hooks, but it does form a nice base on which for all of the materials to bind. Right, having prepared the strip of ether foam with a little tail shape cut out, now grip the ether foam so that the hook very quickly. Just trap that out of the way, it's got a mind of its own. Then lift the tail back and make the first 2 turns right under the tail, and then the subsequent turns touching each other all the way back to almost to the eye. Just leave enough space to tie the back material off. 3 turns with the silk will hold it. And then that's followed by the ribbing. Nice, equal, open, firm turns. Once again, tie off with 2 or 3 turns. No need for half hitches or any of that rubbish. Wax silk will hold everything. Now we're ready for the foam back to come over. It's a very quick fly to dress, this one. Once again, 3 firm turns to see everything's going okay. 2 or 3 more to make sure it doesn't move. Cut away at a nice angle to the eye of the hook so that we can build up a little head, which will later be varnished with red varnish. Tie everything down nice and neatly in butting turns, build up the head and finish off with the usual whip finish. Cut the silk away, then polish the head up. Because it's wax thread, it makes a nice finish to the head, and there's really no need to varnish the head if you don't want to. Another good standby for late summer, autumn and even late autumn fishing is the little black tadpole. Strange as it may seem, but trout do tend to get black orientated as we get towards the back end, and this simple to tie fly will take good bags right up to the closing days of the season. The hook I'll be choosing today, and actually fishing, is a size 8, but you can go smaller, but not much smaller. You can also go larger. For the tail of the tadpole we use black marabou. For the underbody, if you wish it to be leaded, lead wire, and the body itself is formed from black chenille, and the silk is black just to complement the rest of the actual fly. Now for this one I'm going to put an underbody of lead wire for fishing it deep, and since the advent of super glue, leading has become extremely simple. All we do is make a wind on the lead, pick up the super glue, put quite a generous dob on the top, And then with the dubbing needle, just spread it around, make sure both ends are tacked, as it were, and the actual laps themselves. And that will give off in about 10 seconds. In fact, it will be given off by the time I'm ready to put the tail in. That's not going to move, so don't be frightened that your fly's going to drop to bits on you. So the silk or thread, whichever you're using, is introduced right behind the lead wire underbody, taken just to where the bend begins. And we're then ready to put in the tail, formed by collecting tiny plumes, 3 or 4 of them, from the main feather, and then they're spun into the shuttlecock formation which I described early on in part 1 of this series. The tail is offered up and caught in. Just check for length, that seems fine. And the thread is taken forward as far as the underbody of lead. And there we trim everything off nice and level. Take the thread back to the tail where we catch in the chenille. Let's have the central core exposed. Then take the thread forward once again to a position just behind the eye. And then the chenille is wound in nice touching turns, throwing up this nice dense flue until we get to just behind the eye. 2 or 3 turns will secure. Cut away the waste. Clean the silk, 'cause it does tend to pick up bits of fluff and bits of chenille. Make a nice neat head with the tying silk. And then finish with the usual whip finish. There it is, pulled tight. Polish the head, as always. Packs all that lovely wax into the turns of silk. And there you have an effective little killer that can fish quite deeply.
An early morning start from Whitwell Lodge at Rutland Water, one of Bob's favourite reservoirs, offering good sport at every season on over 3,000 acres of well-stocked water. Late September, and the weather is quite changeable, so fishing tactics will have to be varied too as the day progresses. A boat has been organised so that Bob and his fishing partner George Broadbury can have the mobility needed to find the fish.
Yesterday we fished this area near the weed beds with the Wadham's floating fry. There was a lot of fry bashing activity and the trout were taking really well. But today it's totally different. An overnight frost followed by a chill wind has put the fish down, and we've got to follow them with sinking lines and fish imitating lures. The sun on our backs is very welcome, taking away some of the early chill. A lovely flight of Canada geese just moving off to find a bit of breakfast, but the fish don't seem too hungry yet. Then our luck changed. George had a very solid take and it was all systems go to land our first fish of the day. Targeted up and he moves in and takes it. The hooks we'll be using to tie the tandem feather duster this particular time are size 6 4X long shanks. You can go small, you can go larger, and these will be constructed into what we call a mount. These are 2 hooks joined in line with a very strong monofilament strand, around about 30-pound breaking strain in this case. And then along the top of the shank, the entire dressing will comprise of somewhere in the region of 16 to 18 marabou shuttlecock plumes. The thread I will be using in this particular instance will be white, fluorescent white. It complements the plumes, but I've also found that over the years that it doesn't hurt, or it can sometimes perhaps even improve, who knows, to use scarlet. The monofilament I'll be using to join the 2 hooks together in order to make the mount is Tynex from Tom Savills of Nottingham. 30 pounds breaking strain. This is quite important because it's so stiff that when used on a short linkage it will not allow the 2 hooks to turn over and interlock with each other. Start off with about 4 to 6 inches of 30-pound Tynex and we've got to give it a little crimp to make a purchase for the silk to grip on. And this is easily done by just going along about ½ an inch with a pair of strong forceps. Having done that, we need a leading edge so that we can run the silk off. So it's just a simple slice with the scalpel. So having prepared this these days since the advent of super glue, and we put a little application underneath the shank and to the monofill, and then it's simply lashed quite quickly to the shank because this type of glue goes off very quick indeed. Touching or near touching turns. Careful you don't get hooked up with this stuff because you can get stuck to the shank, but just keep lining it up and pressing the monofill underneath, and these quick, very quick turns, but they're quite tight, and the natural tapered end of the monofill all lines up, and then tie off with a whip finish and allow that to go off. In fact, I would dare bet that I could pull as hard as I like now on this, and no trout or me, if it came to that, would separate the at this point in time why we didn't complete the whole mount in the first place, as opposed to tying half of it and then coupling up later. And at this point in time, we're about to add the last plume, and I think you'll begin to appreciate then why we did not put the hook on in the first place. Now, as you can imagine, had there been a hook there, we would have had quite a job to finish the fly. Not only that, to have dressed it to this point already. And so there's the rear half of the lure completed, and all we have to do now is attach the front hook, then carry on with the tying process. We need a hook in the vise to start measuring just how long the linkage needs to be. And as I say, even though this is very strong, very stiff monofilament silk, short distance from the bend, just enough to make a bed to lay the monofilament on, and then we just line this up as we did before and take 2 or 3 turns over the top, nice and tight, and then check that everything is in line, the hook is in line, not cocked to one side, because this thing's got to plane through the water perfectly. And the beauty of the feather duster is that you don't have to strip it through in order to give it life. Because of the buoyancy of the marabou, it means that you can fish it quite slowly. By that I don't mean as you would fish a nymph, but you can fish this much slower than the average streamer lure. Hold the bend of the rear hook so that it doesn't twist. We've got it into the correct position, we want to keep it there. And now we work quite quickly, as I say, binding down very firmly. Must meet the bare shank very, very firmly. And this way there is no way that that's going to move. I've fished with lures made in this way season after season, and they just do not budge. As you could see, I could pull on that nice and tight even now, and it's in perfect position. So having done that, the silk or thread, whichever you happen to be using, can be taken back in nice open turns, back to the starting point, to a position where the first plume will be tied in. Measure it up to the rear one and tie in. And this is the process that we will keep up now, as before, on the rear hook until we reach the eye. And that completes the final plume. Bind it down tight so there's no marabou sticking up between the laps of thread. Stroke everything back, keeping it well out of the way, and then just complete the head. Just build the silk up into a nice natural taper, and then just complete it with the usual whip finish. And once again, push all the wax into the laps of silk, and there we have the completed lure. And just to give some idea of the uniformity of the plumes, I'll just give them a light dampening, stroke them back, and that's what we're aiming for, this nice continuation of plumes which will quiver nice and enticingly in the water. Now this proves the point. Now this brownie was the first fish I took during the day, and this one's got a perch in it. You see, it's partly digested, but that's a perch. And the acids of the stomach have started to work on it already, as you can see. If I was to get the lure that I actually took this fish with and lay it alongside, you'll see that it wasn't too big by any stretch of the imagination. Palmer patterns can be particularly useful during the back end, as we call the autumn. The traditional pattern, the soldier palmer or red palmer, it can be fished in all sizes. It's a very, very good bob fly, something to be fished on the top, dibbled in the surface. Obviously, if we've got a good wave, that's the best time to use it. The red-tailed soldier palmer, by algae. In other words, the visibility has been reduced and they stand out more. And almost going from the ridiculous to the sublime is the Loch Hawley. This is a traditional Scottish pattern. This is a particularly heavily densed one. It's a pattern I brought back from Orkney, and it makes a perfect top dropper fly. Tremendous displacement in the surface film or in the waves, and on certain days it can really turn the trout on, and they chase and they take very well indeed. And the one I'm going to tie today is one that I've had an awful amount of success with this year, the amber tagged wingless wickham. It's a short shanked hook, but it can be dressed in 14s, 12s, 10s. You could even go larger, but the one that's been most successful for me this year has been the one we're going to tie today, and that is the size 10 standard shank. The material for the tail is Glow Bright number 8, and that shade is amber. The body material is going to be gold lurex. The rib, number 26, gold wire. For the body hattle, we use 2 hattles for the fly, and the body hattle is a shorter fibred feather taken from low down the cape. This is a natural red cape. And for the collar hattle, one taken further up the cape, so it's got slightly longer fibres. A hot orange silk, a daylight fluorescent silk, or thread should I say, and the reason for this I'll explain as we tie the fly. As always, introduce the tying thread pretty close to the eye and run it down the shank for about 1/3 the length. Now for the tail I'm using 6 strands of number 8 Glow Bright. Just nice touching turns, back to the silk, and tie off with 2 tight turns. Wax silk won't let you down, it will hang on to the materials for you. Next we take the smaller of the 2 hattles, strip away the base flue, and tie in with 3 tight turns, and break away the stem. You can cut it away of course, but for speed I like to break it. And then we go down the shank, we make a nice full turn to start with, flare the hattles out, and then we do nice open turns, equally spaced, all the way down the gold body until we get to the gold wire. Now that is taken over the shank, the waste hattle broken away, saves cutting it away later, just a little flick against the wire, then bring the gold up to the silk and then tie it off with 2 or 3 really tight turns. And once again, no need to use your scissors, just rock at the junction and you'll find the wire breaks away very, very close to the silk. It doesn't even leave a raw edge. Right, we stroke the hattles back, follow back with the tying thread, and then prepare the next hattle. So as before, tie in very tightly, take the silk to the eye and break away the stem. And all we need now is to form the collar hattle. I like a nice dense collar hattle, particularly if you're fishing in a high wave where you want to make plenty of surface disturbance. Just flick the hattles to make them flare. Sometimes with a hennycock hattle they do tend to clog, but a little flick with the fingers will open them out. 2 turns with the silk, pull it tight, and once again you can break the hattle away. Flare the hattles out, stroke them back, and then cover the roots with 3 or 4 turns just to give a nice backward rake. Clean the silk, make sure there's no wax or anything clogging it, and do a nice neat whip finish to the head. Pull tight, polish the wax into the turns of thread. Challenge for me. The weather looks ideal and the forecast's good. I don't know how we're going to fish at this point in time. We need some wind. I think we'll get it, the forecast says so. But nevertheless, with it being a deep water, we'll be fishing, I think, anywhere from just under the surface, in the surface, and possibly going right down deep. But I'm not going to resort to the sinking line today. I am going to fish the floating line, just to try and prove a point that fish can be taken in such waters with the floating line, provided we match the artificials accordingly. Right, if the fish start to rise, it's debatable what they might be on. I've got a feeling that they could come up for some tiny black spiders because there's a lot being blown around on this autumn sunshine. So we could be going on to tiny black spiders as you see here, or we may have to go down onto leaded nymphs just under the surface to make them swim well. Any of these nymphs, small flies, could do the trick. However, if we need to go down, there's every possibility that a montana might do the trick. Nice bulky looking nymph, some lead in the thorax to make it get well down. And if we need to go really deep, then we turn leaf and look into the other side where the big nasties are, and it might have to be something like perhaps a white nobbler. Don't really want to have to resort to this on such a gorgeous day, but to get the depth on a floating line it may have to be something like that, or it may well be something a little more delicate, and that is the tadpole, the black tadpole. Any of these, just to get us a few feet down, fish slowly under the surface, I think we'll score. About 30 yards out from the bank there's a small island, reached by a punt. I've decided to start here because I've noticed 1 or 2 fish rising downwind of this position, which would be impossible to cover from the bank. 4 other anglers are fishing from the bank, all of them without a take so far. I've tattled up with a weight forward line, an 18-foot leader, a montana nymph on the point, and within just 4 casts I'm into a fish. Doesn't feel like a very big fish, but it's fighting well for its size. First fish of the day on a small water like this always draws attention. Not quite ready for the net. Makes the last run for open water, but this really ties him and he rolls over. The net goes under and he's mine. Within a few minutes the bank anglers are lucky too. It's strange, sometimes something happens. No one knows why, but the fish suddenly begin to take. This is often referred to as a softening in conditions. You can't really describe it, but you can feel it. After that flurry of activity, the conditions changed again and the wind suddenly dropped. I fished out the edge of the ripple hoping for a take, but no luck. The lake now almost dead calm, so I decided it's a good time to change my position and try another fly. Right, I'm changing over now from the Montana nymph because there's a lot of spiders blowing along on tiny webs and there's one or two trout rising in. I had a good solid take then, but he's not on. Keeping the line coming through, you never know, he might still be following. This is there. Never lose concentration, always fish your fly out. Many a fish is lost by lifting straight off after a take instead of fishing the fly right out. And here's my reward, another fine fish. As its name implies, the Montana nymph originated in America. And then just strip away the central core, just expose the central core, and then tie it in right close up to the tail. Then bring the silk back in nice touching turns up to the lead. And what you might find is a slight deficit there, like a slight drop off in height because of where the tails are cropped off, and that can easily be made up just by 2 runs of silk or thread. So the body can be formed simply by winding the chenille in nice touching turns, allowing the flue to throw up nice and proud. And when we get to this position, we tie the chenille so that it is tied off exactly on the top of the shank. You'll see why later because it makes the thorax. Right, the next job is to tie in a cock hattle which will form the legs, or hattle. It is a hattle, but it's going to form the legs. We strip away all the insignificant fibres and tie this in alongside the head end of the abdomen, or the head end of the abdomen chenille. Next we go for some fluorescent yellow chenille. This has hardly got a grain, but it's still best to feel for it so that you get the best of the flue. Once again, strip away and expose the central core and get this right close in and tie in and take the silk backwards to get a good junction with all the materials get a good junction with the head end of the abdomen. Snip away the waist chenille and the stalk and take the silk forward in nice touching turns to a spot where it drops off, the edge of the lead. It's just as it drops off, that's where you end. Don't go any nearer to the eye. The thorax is then wound on in nice touching turns, leaving no gaps at all, but then again not building up on top of each other. And then tie off as soon as you get to the end of the lead. The waist chenille can now be trimmed away. And the hattle wound through. Now the important thing about winding this hattle is that you've got to try and aim to get it right between the laps of the chenille. That way it'll be protected. Holding the hattles back out the way. Build up a nice, not a bold head, but quite meaty. It's got to represent the head of the nymph. And then finish off with the usual whip finish. Pull tight. Whip out the excess wax accumulated by the whip finish and then just give the head a rub round to consolidate the loose wax into the laps of silk. And there we have the Montana nymph. He took up when I was on halfway on the drawback and slightly leaded. This is a version of a pheasant tail called the Skinner nymph. There's a little bit of lead in the thorax just to get it underneath, just under the surface. And that one will act as my anchor fly. And then on the top, I think I'm going to try mallard and claret. And something about this size will do, about a 12. And just tuck it through. And just a little pull on the tag just to tighten everything up. Nice and in line, neat. Having gone down for more than an hour or so, the fish have now come back on top and I'm fishing the Skinner nymph just under the surface. The island position is paying off once again. Retrieving the nymph with medium paced draws on the line. Keeping the rod tip low in order to feel the most delicate of touches. And there it is. The line tightens, the hook is set, and the fish leaps from the water about 20 yards out. Very long leader, so the leader's actually going to come up through the rod rings. A nice athletic fish, this one, diving deep, shaking his head and trying everything he can to throw the hook. Not going to bully him too much because it's quite a fine point. And the head state, we might just take it off from there. I'll just go under the net that time. It's taking that Skinner nymph that we just tied on. Just in the surface film. Very well hooked right in the neb there. This tiny Skinner nymph. It is a very nice fish, full fins, nice strong battle. Nice way to take a fish too on the nymph. Right in the top on an autumn day. Well, it turned out to be a marvellous day's fishing. The weather stayed good as forecast. We've had sun all day long. We've had light ripple. Sometimes it's been calm, but we fished as forecast with the floating line. I've taken a nice bag of 5 rainbows from deep, very deep, right into the surface. What more can I say? A nice end to a very pleasant day.
We've come to the end of our seasonal guides to fly tying and fishing for trout. There are, of course, literally thousands of fly patterns. Some can be effective throughout the year, like the pheasant-tail nymph. But others are particularly seasonal, like the mayfly. It's easy to get lost in the type and variety of flies you could tie. A particularly useful book by Bob Carnill and Kenneth Robinson details 70 successful trout lures, how to tie them and when to fish them. Catching fish on a fly you've tied yourself really does give you that extra buzz. even when the results can be somewhat unexpected.
Are you gonna hold it up? Not really yet.
Of course, part of the excitement and mystery of fishing is that you can never really predict what's going to happen. There are fallow times when the cock brownies offer no sport for the fishermen and aren't worth catching. They gather in the shallows, moody and sluggish. But with some of the newly evolved rainbow stocks, it's now possible to fish right through the year on some waters. There are beautiful lakes, reservoirs and rivers all over Britain, well stocked and managed for the fishermen, with good bags to be caught at every season. Even so, there are days when nothing seems to go right.
But you know what's the big bugbear, don't you? We've got the same conditions exactly as we had about a year ago when we fished the Alex Booth match. Something like, what, 30, 35, 36 rods out?
Yeah, there's a lot of rods for one fish, wasn't there?
One fish.
But that was similar conditions. It was a harsh, bright sun.
Yeah. I think this combination of a northeast wind, very dry atmosphere, the steely blue sky, it's just a kiss of death to it, isn't it?
But then, of course, there's always another day.